Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to the second in Infotech series of webinars focused on the infrastructure bill. Here at Infotech, we have over 40 years of experience supporting and managing infrastructure improvement projects that affect state and local governments, and we certainly enjoy this opportunity to share our thoughts on the massive undertaking with you. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us for our panel discussion today. Before we get started, let's do a little housekeeping. Throughout today's webinar, you will be on mute, but we'd love your participation. There is a QA feature located at the bottom of your screen, so please use this to ask any questions you have throughout the webinar. We will address as many questions as we can at the end. And don't worry if we don't get to your question. Everyone will receive a follow-up email with answers to all questions that were asked. Finally, we understand we are all using Zoom with varying internet connections, which may bring its own challenges. You may experience connection issues, but know that a recording of this webinar will be available next week. Now for the introductions to our panel before we get started. Today, your panel consists of myself, and I am the Associate Vice President in the Astrowares Product Division at Infotech. And I have over 35 years in both public and private sectors. 25 of those years were at the Nebraska Department of Transportation, with experience kind of leveraged toward roadway design, project development, and construction contract administration, including assisting with the local public agency project oversight. With me today is Chad Richards.
Hi, everybody. My name's Chad Richards. I'm a business analyst for the Astrowares Products Division at Infotech, and I am a licensed professional engineer with an emphasis on cost estimating, risk management, and constructability. I have a little over 18 years of experience in the industry, about half between public and private. And before joining Infotech recently, I was the engineering cost analyst for the Montana Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Chad. Also with us is Jeff Hism. Jeff?
Hello, everyone. I am still Jeff Hism. I've been working for the past 2 years with Infotech in the business development area as a senior strategy analyst. My first job out of college was as a cost estimator with a material supplier to the highway industry. And then I served almost 37 years with the Ohio Department of Transportation, working in estimating and bid analysis and concentrating on assuring that public funds were being utilized in the most efficient manner. Since joining Infotech, my focus remains on improving agencies' estimating processes and data analytics capabilities, and through the use and improvement of Infotech's software.
Thank you, Jeff. So today's agenda, we're going to go over the infrastructure bill status. I'll do just a quick brief status update, and then we'll break into our moderated panel discussion where we'll discuss some points that we feel are pertinent to the infrastructure. And then we'll follow that up with a quick recap of what occurred during the panel discussion. And then that will be followed up by question and answer area for you to ask us any questions you'd like along the way that you've gathered along the way. And then, of course, we'll have closing remarks to sew it all up and deliver it to you. So with that, let's get started. On November 15th, the President signed the Infrastructure Investments Job Act, enacting this legislation into law. So in total, the deal includes $550 billion in new federal investments in American infrastructure over the next 5 years. The investments focus is on infrastructure, equity, climate change mitigation, resilience, and safety for all users. Part of that deal includes investing $110 billion into roads, bridges, and major infrastructure projects. So you ask yourself, what happens now that that's been signed? Well, now the rubber hits the road, basically, as the action shifts from those policymakers in Washington, D.C. to the administrative agencies that have to carry out these policies. Federal agencies like the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy have an enormous responsibility to implement this, standing up new programs in finding ways to safely get the money out the door. But the biggest burden really lies in the state and local officials. As the owner and operators of most infrastructure, they must plan, design, estimate, build new assets, hire more workers, and even mobilize their own financial resources. As we learned during ARA, those of you that recall ARA, a decade ago, shovel-ready projects such as resurfacing and improving roads happen much faster than these more sophisticated capital projects, such as new system expansions. So this will take resources with the technical expertise to understand the data and the tools they have on hand to do the job effectively and efficiently. This webinar today is coming at you from a data management perspective and an estimator's perspective. As you notice, Chad and Jeff have a lot of estimation background in them, cost analysis. So that's the perspective we're coming at you with. And also, as you know, Infotech is a data services company, and we feel we can provide some insight to owners and operators to successfully, I can't speak, handle the upfront analysis and reporting on this immense influx of new federal funding. So the panel today will discuss 4 points we believe are important to be successful. Those 4 points are planning, estimation, competitive bids, and reporting. And with that, I'm going to turn over the first point over to Jeff to dig into planning. Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Chad and I are just going to start with the first of the 4 points in our data discussion, and that is in the planning area. In contrast to the previous stimulus bill 9 years ago, where the focus was on shovel-ready projects, this bill is about planning forward and defining additional work to be done in the next 5 years. So planning is an important part of this infrastructure bill, so much more than it was 9 years ago. This is where the infrastructure project data begins. This data will be used and referred to in the entire life cycle of all the added projects that you'll be working with in the next 5 years. And the focus there is on added projects. We still know that you have your regular programs to deal with. This is work to be done over and above what you normally have do on a yearly basis. Important to note that project planning can rely heavily on similar past project information and estimate costs for new projects. It's important to have a plan for storing and retrieving the data, even in the early stage of a development, as it will be referred to during the life cycle and the final reporting on those projects. Chad, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about funding these projects, the grant process, and some thoughts maybe on federal support for local agencies.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, ARA was really all about shovel-ready projects. And with this new infrastructure bill, I really liked the term that they used, shovel-worthy projects, for this new bill. And so with this new bill, general funding is going up dramatically. I'm sure most of us are all aware of that. And so FHWA just recently released, I think it was Friday, I saw it, that they released fact sheets for all the states on what the expected funding levels are going to be for all the agencies. So I went through them real quick, and it looks like most states are going to get somewhere in a 26 to 40% increase in funding. Rhode Island was low at 15.5, and Hawaii was the high at 54. Now, that being said, and going back to the shovel-worthy aspect of this, is there's a lot of additional money, and a huge chunk of this is additional money that's going to be done through competitive grants. And that's really where the planning is going to be really important for these new projects, and getting that shovel-worthy money is through this competitive grant process. And that process is going to apply to pretty much every sector of infrastructure. I'll outline one real quick that most of us, in this industry are going to be familiar with, and that's bridges. If you've seen the bridge investment program, is getting a huge piece of money. If memory serves me, it was about $12.5 billion just for this grant program. So what they're going to be looking at is, in the grant process, they're looking at things like safety benefits, upgrades to personnel and freight mobility, the economic benefits of that enhancement, long-term resiliency to climate change and weather events, environmental benefits. This one is, more of a recent change, including wildlife connectivity, and then non-vehicular and public transportation. And then also one that is gotten rolled into this is innovative design and construction techniques, like for this instance would be bridge bundling, and then also innovative technologies. So this all comes around to, they say, consider whether and to the extent to which the benefits, including the benefits I just described, are more than likely outweigh the total cost. So really they're wanting a benefit cost analysis to see, are these projects worthy of the money? Do they add back to the economy or, the public good, the cost of the project? So, that's really where there's going to be a lot of planning involved with this. And this same format applies to a lot of other areas in transportation, where we have money for wildlife crossings. So not only do we have the bridge investment program, but we have wildlife crossings, which are generally bridges or large culvert structures. We have the congestion relief program, rural surface transportation grant program, the climate resiliency program, which is called Protect. And then just to add more money into that bridge program, we have a culvert removal, replacement, and restoration program, which is going to fall into a lot of the same money. So that's just a small piece of all of the grants that are going to be available out there. And just to kind of wrap this up, a piece I found towards the middle of it is this federal support for local decision making. They are potentially investing in some decision-making software for the more local and regional governmental organizations to assist with all of this. So they're gonna partake into research and potential development within the feds. There's gonna be a lot of analysis on decision-making software to get used at the state, local, other government levels to assist in spending this money. So those are some of the major pieces on the planning side that I see that are going to be really important moving forward.
Okay, so Chad and I have briefly described some of the things that we'll need to be addressing in the planning phase of your infrastructure projects, keeping in mind that you'll need this information down the line, at least part of the final reporting, if not during the other phases of this project development. So next, we want to move into the second point in our data discussion, that of being able to estimate the cost of these additional projects. And I bold-faced and underlined additional projects. This is going to be a lot more work than what you're normally used to. We want to have enough and the right mix of projects so you can utilize all the federal money. Obviously, there are things earmarked that you need to make sure that you're spending the money on those projects. You need to be prepared with additional projects if the money is not spent in other agencies. As we have seen in other places, some states can't spend all their money. I know with ERA, there was money left over at the end of that period, and it was redistributed to those agencies that were prepared to do additional work. That's something that you might want to think about in your planning also. In contrast to the last stimulus, this bill is about the future projects for the next 5 years. All three phases of estimating, planning, design, and final estimates may need to be performed. Chad, can you talk a little bit about additional things to be thinking about in the estimating phase of our data journey?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. So the first thing I want to touch on here is, lawmakers acknowledged, really happy to see this when they rolled the bill out, was that the lawmakers acknowledged that the impact this bill was going to have on the market in an already, we already have reduced construction workforces, high inflation, and supply chain shortages. So, they did acknowledge this and, took that into consideration with this bill. But that being said, this is a lot of money to get thrown into an arena that's already, short-staffed. At least it is in the markets I've been working in. And so, one of the major keys I see in making this work is, market analysis, being able to take a look at the market and seeing where things like market saturation are coming in. And a lot of this is going to apply, all the way back into programming. Programming and the estimation are really going to be tied together through a lot of this, because you got to put together that good estimate for at your planning stage so that you can get that money. But you can't just throw a lot of money out there, because you're not going to get that grant if you're not competitive. So like I said, one of the keys is going to be that market analysis to know, can we get this work done? What kind of prices are we going to see? And then, the programmatic scheduling, I think, is going to come in pretty big when you're putting out this much work with a limited contractor availability. Being able to put together a programmatic plan and be able to lay out, say, that 5-year STIP plan, and be able to plan out those projects and stagger work activities so that you can try to maximize those dollars, and be able to, make sure that as different work activities are being completed, those contractors can move on to the next job. Not letting 2 or 3 big bridge jobs all at the same time where you're going to have similar contractors vying for that work. Usually that just leads to liquidated damages and blown contract days. So let's see, next up, inflation rates are going up. We've all seen inflation rates going up. And as we're looking at our STIP and our long-term planning estimates, we really need to take that into account and make sure that we're accounting for inflation, reviewing our cost indexes. And as we're putting together those long-term estimates, make sure that you're covering those inflation rates and cost indexes in your cost estimates. In the past, it's always been fairly acceptable to use that standard 3% inflation, but now where we're creeping up around 6-7%, if we're trying to forecast that out a couple years with a program of, in excess of $400, $500, $600 million in additional funding, that's a lot of money. So, that's something that really needs to, have a hard look at. That is, how you're accounting for your costs in the long run. And, tied into all that, and I'm sure a lot of agencies and especially small municipalities are questioning, what's matching funds going to look like in this, because that's something that's really going to have to get forecast, is what are your matching funds going to look like? So I dug through the bill a little bit and tried to find some information on what the matching funds were going to look like. It's still pretty vague. At least I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer. So trying to read this thing was a little difficult, but from what I garnered, all programs are going to be 80% unless otherwise noted. A few of them did note differences. But then there was a clause in one of the sections that said the secretary may waive non-federal shares at their consideration, basically. So we might see changes as the bill moves along and things get implemented. We'll probably see some changes in those shares, but it's too early to tell exactly what we're going to have there.
Chad, one thing I wanted to mention just a little bit when you were talking about inflation rates, we're seeing inflation going up without the added money. And I know when ERA was around, we did see some inflated costs at that point. That's one thing that you all will have to kind of take a close look at. And I know that most states are using at least some bid-based estimating. Many states use 100% bid-based estimating. You're going to have to be very careful about using bid histories, even though you have to do it. But you're going to have to be able to figure out how to inflate those costs for the standard rise in inflation that we seem to be seeing now. And then added to that, the inflation that we may see as a result of this extra money that's being put out by the infrastructure plan. So there's lots of things to think about in the area of estimating, and a lot of challenges for all of us. Now we want to talk a little bit about the next phase of the discussion, where the agency needs to put their benchmark final estimates to good use to analyze competitive bids. With the amount of additional money this bill is providing, it's paramount to have a good system to analyze the bids. We need to make sure that the contracting community isn't taking advantage of the extra money as much as we can. We need to analyze and affirm that you're getting value for those extra dollars, because later on you'll need to assure the public that these additional funds that were sent out to us were worth it. So Chad, do you want to talk a little bit about bid analysis and competitive bidding?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things to get looked at here is to really keep track of those pricing trends and keep track of not only the pricing trends, but also keeping cost indexes available on things like construction materials. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more down below. But one of the big expansions through this bill was the Buy America Act. So that's going to have an impact on our prices. So, keeping track of material prices and the impacts Buy America is going to have on those materials, that's going to be a big part of your analysis, all the way back into cost estimating. This is all tied together. So, but it's really going to apply here too, because, not only are you going to have to review for fair and competitive bids, but, you also need to recognize those trends on those materials and things like that, and read the market so that you can hopefully try to minimize those justifications and disagreements with contractors over estimates, if prices are climbing due to materials from, say, the Buy America Act. So there's a lot to take into consideration when reviewing those bids.
Okay. Then when the projects are completed and the roads are open, you aren't finished. We all need to report not only to our constituents in the state, but to the federal government and to the nation that their investment in roads and highways was worthwhile. That is what your tax dollars built over and above what we normally do. This is the extra money that we normally would not have planned for, that we were able to get in this infrastructure bill, and these are the projects. This is how much better off we are because of it. And this is an extremely important part that really isn't about building the roads, but it's about telling the public what we've done with that extra money and assuring them that there was value in this extra money being put out to these agencies. So Chad, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Reading through the grant process, it looks like a lot of the reporting, lion's share of the reporting is going to be more on the upfront side. So the grant process, submitting all of that, and a lot of the reporting I've seen in there all relates to the federal agencies reporting back to Congress on how that money is being spent and where it's all going. But that being said, there's more than likely going to be a fair level of follow-up for final pricing final improvements, things like that. That being said, there's two big areas where there are going to be some further reporting. And I already mentioned one of them, and that is Buy America. That is expanding dramatically. I'm sure most everybody has seen that. Traditionally, it's always been just steel and iron products, and it's predominantly been on just the federal projects related generally to transportation. But with this expansion through the infrastructure bill, it's rolling it out to all federal aid programs. So any program with federal aid dollars is going to be required to comply with these new Buy America requirements. So the new Buy America requirements are still somewhat vague. They basically just say construction materials, and largely that's going to consist of non-ferrous metals, plastics, composites, glass, lumber, and drywall were the ones that I was able to find. So it's going to be interesting seeing that shift in the industry, seeing those certs roll out and how they're going to handle all of that. And then just the agencies having to deal with all those additional certification processes and dealing with all the extra stuff that comes with those Buy America certs. And then the other one, I couldn't find a lot of detail on it, but they are expanding Dbe participation as well. It's, from what I can tell, it's going to be the same thing. Any federal aid project is now going to be required to comply with Dbe. And right now it's rolled out at 10%. It sounds like that may get modified, by agencies, by the secretary, et cetera. But that was the benchmark that was in the bill, was 10% participation on all federal aid. So, sorry, DBE is disadvantaged business enterprise. So, those were the two big pieces that I saw with reporting and what's coming for major changes, outside of just the highway work.
Okay, well, reporting obviously takes a lot of data. Data doesn't drive the project. It certainly doesn't physically put beams on our abutments and our piers. It doesn't put asphalt on the roadway, but it can help you learn about the past and how you put your projects together. It can manage the present and prepare yourself for the future. It helps to address the challenges of managing an additional $550 billion in infrastructure work over the next 5 years. And it will give you the information to explain what you have done for those who don't do this work every day. Your next door neighbor is going to want to know where all that money went, and you're going to have to be able to come up with the data to be able to report on it. So those are the 4 points. Being an estimator and an analyst, I just want to go back just a little bit and talk about bid analysis. I know that this is was a very important part of what we did, not only to ensure that the dollars are being spent, but one great advantage of doing your bid analysis is letting your contracting community know that that you are watching what they're doing and making sure that their costs are reasonable. That's a very important part of the data analysis portion of this. Chad, do you have anything else for us?
I don't think so.
Okay. Jim?
Hey guys, you sure nothing else you'd like to add on there before I move away and get to the recap here?
I'm good. We'll move on with questions, I think.
Jeff's gone on mute here. I'm just used to you guys filling up more space, and putting some more words into it. So, well, thank you for that, going through that. Appreciate you hitting those points. I know There's probably several questions in the Q&A. I'll have to take a peek in there, but let me kind of recap. Let me recap what I've heard here, at least today. As stated earlier, it's really about good data management, and data management sort of follows that same life cycle path as a project would. But we brought out 4 points here, which was planning, estimation, competitive bids, and reporting. And under planning, what I heard here was the infrastructure bill. One thing, it's a 5-year bill focused on shovel-worthy instead of shovel-ready projects across nearly every sector of infrastructure. Most states will receive a 26 to 40% increase in funding over and above what their typical funding is annually. And additional money is actually going to be coming through a competitive grant process that Chad was talking about, which I think agencies are really good about grants and writing grants, but it looks like a lot of money is tied up into that grant process on top of that's available to agencies if they choose to chase that down. Under estimation, I heard that market analysis will be very important to make sure you're not oversaturating the work being let. So when you're dusting off those projects off the shelf, or the ones that you feel are shovel worthy, that you're not too heavy in one area where you're not only overburdening your contractor here, but overburdening your resources that really look at that type of work. I also heard that inflation rates and cost indexing will be very important to those long-term estimates, especially inflation rates. We see inflation sort of walking away from us right now, and that could be very, very impactful to us 5 years from now when we're trying to get projects on the board. So in that estimating and forecasting, it's very critical that those are as accurate as can be, specifically if you're going to have matching fund requirements. So anytime you have those requirements, you certainly want to get yourself in a situation when you're doing the best for those dollars that you're needing to match with. Under competitive bids, I think what I took away from that, and you guys can help me out here a little bit, is that you need to really have a good system in place to make sure you're getting the value for those extra dollars. And that's not only to protect you as an organization, as a government organization, or whoever is listening on here that's going to go after these money, but also that community you work with. You want to make sure you're getting good value from your contractor who's doing the work and not taking advantage of you because you're trying to be very quick and get jobs on the road. We all have been in situations like that where some of the details get missed because you're trying your hardest just to get that job on the board and get it out the door and get it worked on. And that can be that can sort of be detrimental in that if you're ending up with a lot of change orders later on to that project to try to make it go through and make it go right. So you certainly want to cut down on that. And it's really important also to keep track of pricing trends and factor that material pricing into those estimates analysis. So again, that sort of that indexing I spoke of in the previous category, but making sure we're watching the inflation rates, watching that material pricing so that we're getting those accurate bids, because an accurate bid is really the basis all the way along the way to everything else you're doing to utilize this money. And then in reporting, I think the one thing that's important here and that I believe I heard here is just complete transparency into the stewardship of these funds, right? That we're familiar with this. Most of us that work with government agencies is you are accountable to that taxpayer money, and you need to show where that value is being done. And especially those that were involved with ARA understand that the federal government, they threw up a website. The reason for doing that is that there's accountability for every project task, every dollar, every outcome, that Congress can actually look at the metrics from those things. And, even if I didn't vote for this thing, but it's impacting my district, I can claim that, right? So they're very interested in knowing exactly where that money is being put down and how it's using, because I'm not saying it's politicized in that nature. But of course, that is knowing that you're doing good for the community is what everybody wants to be able to jump on board with. It does feel like there'll be some follow-up on reporting on final construction costs. Like we just said, they'll probably throw up a website just like they did with R to start tracking those stuff. Oh, and also Dbe participation. I noticed in the chat somebody talked about the 10%. And while I'm not familiar yet with what that looks like within the infrastructure bill, usually the 10% is on the federal funds that you've incurred and not on the state funds that you match with. So that's just throwing my opinion in the realm there. I have not actually seen it written out in the bill. One thing that Chad mentioned was the Buy America requirements will be expanded to all programs. So it's not just what you're used to working with today. It's going to be expanded across the board and to all sectors that utilize this money. And then in the end, wrapping that up is we don't have a clear indication of what all the reporting requirements are, but we do know that those requirements will start coming out within the next 4 to 6 months. We'll start seeing a better come together of those administrative agencies that are putting together the ability to put the money out the door and how they're putting out the money to the door. While they're doing that, they're also coming up with the way they want you to report it back to them. So we should start seeing more of that information coming out in the next few months. So that was my recap of what has been said, and I will turn it back over to Chad and Jeff if there's anything else they would like to add before I move on to the question and answer from the attendees.
Well, Jim, in your recap, one of the things that you talked about, with reporting and getting all that information back to the legislators that that passed the bill to give us the money, and certainly they need to be able to explain to their constituents, that this money was well spent. But agencies can do a lot for themselves in this regard, especially if you have your data right at hand. You can explain to your own people, your own constituents, what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you're getting it done. And that is on a much more personal and more timely way of letting them know what is taking place. It's good for your agency, it's good for the state, and it makes your own people within your own state feel good about what you are doing for them. Certainly they'll hear from the politicians about how great this program was, but if you can show them the numbers and show them the roads, this extra bridge was being built, these roads were done that would not have been done for another 10 years or so if this money had not come around, coming from the source, from the people that actually build the roads. That would be very important to that guy next door who goes down to the restaurant or meets his buddies and says, boy, I don't know what they're doing with all this money. You need to be able to tell them that. And if you are keeping track of your data and know how to explain that to them, it'll go a long way toward the next restructuring bill, 5 years from now or 7 years from now.
I really appreciate that perspective, Jeff. That it does seem important. It's not really tooting your own horn, but yet it is tooting your horn, and it is good. A DOT needs that. DOTs, locals, all of them involved with this money really need to shine in this. And I think this is their opportunity to show their shine. And because when those orange barrels start going up, the frustration level of the public goes up too. So to be able to point out what, like you said, is super, super important. I agree. All right, Chad, I'm moving on, buddy.
I'm good, I think. The only thing I can think of is I've seen it in a few news articles where they've talked about the economic benefits, and I really hope that gets fleshed out in a lot of that reporting, is to say, yeah, we did this $1 billion mega project, but it's going to add like, for instance, I watched a news report on a tunnel in New York that I watched it months and months ago, so I can't remember, but it said something staggering like 3% of the national GDP runs through that tunnel in New York every day, and it needs rebuilt. So, to be able to see that level of reporting to say, hey, we invested $1 billion in this, but look at the GDP that runs through that every day. To see things like that. And that was the first thing I thought of when I saw the shovel worthy was this is going to be awesome for the industry. Like the rebuilding that hopefully we can see to be able to really revolutionize things that have been gone by the wayside for the last 60 years. Like I'm excited about it.
And I really do appreciate that term, shovel worthy, like you pointed out. ARA was very focused on shovel ready because it was really about, employment resources. It was really about getting people to work. And this is actually a lot more transformative in it. It's really about the infrastructure and all the things connected around it. So I agree with you. Very excited about this and where it has the potential to go. Okay, well, as I get into the questions, I'm going to pop up. The first one that I have in here is, I have heard the term advanced digital construction management system thrown around in the bill. What does this mean? And I'll take this one, guys. The idea in here is to maximize the amount. I think you heard this from Jeff and Chad, is accurate bids, doing things as accurately as you can to get the best value out of the money you have. Well, that stretches across more than just a bid, right? So the idea is to maximize the amount of that infrastructure that you can get for the dollar of funding giving. All right. So if you're an organization that's currently has a manual or a paper approach to managing projects, that becomes pretty insufficient use of the funding, right? So the bill calls out an allowable expense where public owners can submit the cost of a digital strategy transformation as part of the infrastructure work. So that allows for an agency or an organization to put in a digital project management system to help them immediately maximize their connectivity with other systems and tools. And that in turn increases not only their productivity, but it reduces delay, definitely reduces that reliance on paper, and then greatly, and this is, we can always say this, we're data, we understand data, and it greatly increases the quality of that data collected. If I can enter it once, and that's the only time I need to enter that, I have less chance of error. But if I have to enter that, multiple times, we all know the fat finger syndrome, and that can change data drastically along the way if you're relying on a paper process. So hopefully I answered that question. Next question I'll address. This is an interesting one, and I'm going to hit it with a little bit, but I'm not the expert here. Now I'll lean on Chad and Jeff if they know anything about this. But what types of pipe rehab projects do you anticipate will be prioritized? And what I can say to that is I know that there's about $40 billion, categorized for water infrastructure, right? So that in itself, much of that money will be accessed through that grant process that Chad spoke about. But I do know one of the biggest priorities in there, from what I read, was actually replacing lead service lines. So anywhere where you've got pipe material that's still of the old lead source leading to contamination and those things, those are the things that they would be prioritizing. But I think much of the priority when we're talking about pipe rehabs certainly lies within the organization that does that kind of work or is doing that kind of work, where you would look at, the inventory of your pipe structure, and of course, look at that history, right? Break history, pipe age, pipe material, and especially proximity to critical facilities such as hospitals and things of that nature. So that's sort of the best answer I can throw in there. I don't know if Chad and Jeff have anything else to throw in there.
So Jim, those are actually two separate programs. The lead pipe program is part of the water revolving fund. I can't remember exactly what it's called. I would assume the pipe rehab that's being referred to is the rehab replacement program, and they do have priorities laid out in the bill. If I remember right, it's going to be pipes that are beyond their serviceable life, pipes that are, undersized, things that can be done for climate resiliency if it's now undersized for, future events. And then wildlife connectivity was in there too. So, putting together projects that hit all those parts and pieces are probably going to be, what are going to be prioritized.
Thank you. Thank you for that, clarifying that, Chad. Hopefully we captured what that question was getting to. One of the other questions I have in here is, you seem to have left out the construction phase of the project in your discussion. Was there a specific reason for that?
Yeah, I could make an attempt on that one, Jim. I guess there's maybe a couple of reasons. One, you're looking at a couple of guys on the screen here that are estimators and work on data analysis and bid analysis. So that's where our forte is. The second part of that is the construction side of this is a huge part of obviously what we are going to be doing with this money. And there are so many parts to construction, the materials management, the daily reporting, the DBE requirements, the prompt payments, all of those things are part of that construction portion of the project delivery. And quite honestly, it might be subject matter for another webinar to just talk about what we are doing with reporting and what we are doing with our construction project as we're building these projects.
Thank you, Jeff. Couple of questions. I don't know that we have the answer here, but we can certainly provide links in our follow-up for some of these. One is, what will Arkansas's funding percentage increase be? I think I would say, Chad, you probably have that information that you have done in your research, but you may not have it in front of you at this moment in time. So
I did look it up real quick. I think it was 32% increase for Arkansas.
But we can certainly include a link to where some of that is out on the internet for you to peruse. Appreciate that. Also in the same here is, do you think the public can ask legislators to extend the time period for the IIJ planning for? Okay, 5 years seems like a limiting amount of time. Any thoughts there, gentlemen?
And I'm not an expert on funding. Jeff probably knows more about this than I do. From my limited experience on that side is, for the most part, the money's just going to have to be allocated. So, and the grants, we don't know yet. They might have, you might get a grant 4 years from now that has an expiration date that's 3 or 4 years down the road. So I would say the money's not going to necessarily end in 5 years. It just has to be allocated and in the right bucket in 5 years. So that project could be allocated and let 5 years from now, but it might not finish construction 8 or 9 years. So the money really just needs to be allocated in the next 5 has been what my experience with that funding side is.
Yeah, and I'd say that's pretty much the case. It happened with ARA also, where we were getting close to the end of those time periods, and projects were not identified, and there was a big push for that. Obviously, they want to do it within the time frame that they ask, but what they really want is that you have a commitment to doing the work. And if that commitment doesn't pan out for some of the agencies, there will be other agencies that will be willing and probably able to pick up the slack. So that will also happen too. But there will be that pressure with the pushback that, we want this you've been telling us for years that you need additional funding for infrastructure. We're giving it to you. So let's, get moving. And that will be the impetus to get it done in that 5-year time frame.
All right, next, we still have time for a few more questions here. Which materials do you anticipate being in the most demand?
Boy, that's going to be tough. It looks like lumber and drywall and things like that are coming back into reason, and most of that's already, a lot of that's, well, semi-locally. We get a lot of lumber out of Canada, but I think the most difficult part of all that is going to be the manufactured goods, because they do have, I didn't touch on it in the presentation because it got pretty in depth, but manufactured goods have to have like 55%, if I remember right, local content to be considered, or local as in US manufactured content. So I think those ones are going to be difficult. So a lot of that kind of stuff that is going to be sourced, that's going to be more difficult to deal with the certs. I think that's going to be a lot harder. I could foresee things like water valves and a lot of that kind of stuff, which a lot of that isn't made in the US already and is going to require exemptions. But the little bit of that stuff that is made in the US, I could see being a premium. Most castings and stuff are done in the US, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff that traditionally hasn't been under Buy America. So some of that might be tough. Culverts and a lot of that kind of stuff's already made in the US. Concrete shouldn't be a problem. Traditionally rebar hasn't been an issue. But with the way the steel industry is right now, it could be a wild card. So, I would say it's going to probably revolve around metal products of some sort that haven't traditionally been Buy America. That's probably where we're going to see our biggest hang up. That's my guess.
I was kind of leaning into that. Most demand still might be those typical things that we do see demand for, and you touched on rebar.
Rebar could be a wild card there.
I think rebar is one of those ones that just that increased need for these projects. That one will probably be a very, very, very high demand.
Yeah, and having that expansion from just like federal transportation projects to all federal aid projects, that that potential right there could have a big impact. Like the remesh and things that go into manholes and stuff like that, having to have certs on that, that's something we haven't had to deal with before. So, there's going to be a lot going on there, I think.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I got time for one more here, and let me hit it up here with, and I'm not sure which one of us said this. Maybe it was me. I'm not sure. Federal support for local decision-making criteria. You referred to it as software. Can you elaborate? Are they looking to use a standard system or any system that they can export to some federal portal / standard federal reporting format?
So this was mine, Jim. And I didn't dig into this too far because it was somewhat ambiguous, but what the feds are looking to do through this is they're going to reach out to local decision makers and kind of get a feel within the first year what all the agencies are doing, what software are they using to make their decisions, what data sets are they using to make their decisions. And then from that outreach that they're going to do, they're planning on putting together recommendations to see what data sets are available, what would be needed to further improve the infrastructure decision-making process. And then also they're going to take a look at what tools are publicly available, and then potentially funding some additional tools for use by government agencies to do infrastructure planning. So this would be things like pavement management systems, project management systems, any of those decision-making systems where I guess the ones I think of immediately are asset management and like bridge management systems and, asset management, linear referencing systems, keeping track of what you've got out there and being able to leverage all of that data of I'll go back to bridges, being able to track all of your bridge condition information and being able to run quick analysis and then be able to plug that into your cost estimating and say, I already have all this information in my database that says that this bridge has 4 bents and the spans are 28 feet long. I'm going to plug all that in my cost estimating software and I'm going to come up with a rough planning level estimate based on nothing more than what I have in my bridge management system. So things like that is where they're going. I think, at least that's the way I read it, is that they want to give the tools that, quite a few of the DOTs have this, but I think they're really trying to push more of those tools down to the local agency levels is the way I read it.
And, I might add, Jim and Chad, one thing that we all know, being in the business for such a long time and dealing with the federal government, they are not just hesitant, but just pretty much refuse to identify specific types of software, specific software that they would want you to be using. They are very good at being very ambiguous with regard to the kind of tools that you should be using. The one thing that I might say is that when you are looking for those tools to, collect your data and use it further down the road and during the life cycle of a project, that you get tools that can talk to each other, that can share data across those tools to do different things. That's very important, and it makes your job a lot easier than trying to, you come up with a tool to do one thing, and then the next thing you want to report on or keep track of, you have to re-enter all that data or a lot of that data again, and then you do it for a 4th tool and a 5th tool and so on and so forth. And that makes things not only difficult, but time consuming. And that's one thing that we don't have a whole lot of when we're adding to the program that we already do. So
let me add something here, Jeff. We don't have a lot of time anymore here.
No.
I need to move on, and I apologize for breaking in there.
And now we were just getting started.
I know you guys are just starting to get rolling. And I'm like, wait. So anyway, just let you know before I move on to the next. Any questions? There were several more questions in here, and we, like I said when we started this up, we will get to those. We will answer them, and they'll be part of our email follow-up to you. Again, so appreciate the participation on in here. So thank you for submitting your questions, and thank you, Chad and Jeff, for the additional discussion. So we're going to move right in quickly into the closing items here. As stated earlier, you will receive a recording of this webinar, and we will follow up with not only the questions we've answered, but any questions we haven't answered in that email. You will also receive an infrastructure bill survival handbook. Our team has been researching and packaging some great information that we'll send to you for your reference and for you to share with your colleagues if you'd like. With that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this discussion. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about how Infotech Data Services, our data analysis tools, or help with your organization's digital transformation strategy, please shoot us an email at dataservices@infotech.com. You see it there on the slide. Lastly, after this webinar ends, you're going to be redirected to a brief survey that'll help us improve future webinars. We rely on this information, so we really greatly appreciate if you'll just take a couple minutes to complete the survey. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you again for joining. We really appreciate being able to get in front of you and discuss these things, and look for us to do another one. We certainly have some ideas to move forward. Perhaps the construction phase piece would make a good webinar going forward. And to end it, just happy holidays to you and yours. Enjoy. Thank you.